Chapter 13 of an Autobiography of an Indian Princess. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Val Roth. The Autobiography of an Indian Princess by Maharaja of Cooch Behar, Suniti Devi. Chapter 13. Another Blow. A few days after my husband had passed away, news of Raji's succession to the Gaudiya of Cooch Behar arrived from the government of India. I was seated on the landing at the Porchester Gate house when my boy came downstairs, knelt by me, clasped his hands on my knee, and sobbed. Perhaps he felt his father's loss most at that moment. We had a service in the evening, conducted by my cousin, the Reverend P.L. Sen, at which Raji's short prayer was most impressive. He had all his father's effects sealed and brought over to Cooch Behar, and he carried out his father's will to the letter. When Raji came out to India, one of his younger aunts said to him, "You have succeeded your father, and you will be like him." "Like him," was the quick reply. "That is impossible. I can never dare hope to be like my father." Raji's attitude toward me in my widowhood was one of absolute devotion. He referred to me in everything, although he treated me like a child and took great care of me. He would not allow any alterations to be made in his father's household, and he always answered when he was taxed with keeping too large a staff. "I cannot dismiss any of them. They were with my father." His budget was kept unchanged, as he often said he would not live to be 32 years of age. I tried all I could to laugh him out of this strange idea, but it was to no purpose. Raji's belief was founded on his horoscope, which ceased to say anything after 32 years. Several fortune-tellers told him the same thing, that he had not a long life written on his hand. I asked a woman palmist to read Raji's hand and tell me when he would get married. She said he has no marriage line on his hand. At Dehradun, a fortune-teller said the same thing, and an English clairvoyant also foretold his fate at a garden party in Calcutta. I do not think my son allowed his mind to be influenced by these predictions. His melancholy presentiment was due to his ill health, for I know that he suffered more than he allowed anyone to guess. From the moment of his accession, Raji tried to do his best for Cooch Behar. One of his first acts was to intimate that the Dewan's service was no longer required. "He was never a true friend to my father," was his only comment when the overjoyed natives of Cooch Behar called down blessings on his head for this display of authority. Raji also showed the priests that he possessed decided opinions and meant to retain these opinions even in the face of custom and tradition. Before the installment of a Maharaja, it was usual for the priests to perform a Hindu ceremony known as the Abhishek. Raji declared the Abhishek should not take place. "I do not recognize caste," he said. "But it must be done," declared the state officials. "Who comes next to the priest in my household?" he asked. "Your mother," was the reply. "Then my mother shall act as my priest," he answered. I did the priest's work, for my son would not hear of anyone else assisting him. There was a complete religious ceremony according to the tenets of the new dispensation at the installation, and I shall never forget how splendidly Raji behaved at his durbar when the revenue was brought in, and he was acclaimed Maharaja by his subjects. As he sat on the throne, he received symbolic offerings of betel leaf, attar, and flowers. "Take them to my mother," he commanded, and 2 ADCs brought to me my son's tribute. At the auspicious hour, I was waiting on the balcony with other Zenana ladies to see the state procession pass. The elephants were in their gala trappings. The strains of our national anthem fell on my ears. The troops were in brave array. Suddenly a tall young figure, gorgeous in Raj costume, fell at my feet and paid me homage. It was Raji. He had actually thought of me in the supreme moment of his life. The grandeur and pageantry were all forgotten. I was the mother whom he delighted to honor. That was the one idea in his mind. At his second Durbar, while he was dressing, he suddenly looked very grave and said, "This is my last Durbar." And so it proved to be. I like to recall how my son respected my prejudices. Once when my husband ruled, I heard that there was a vulgar show at one of the Hindu festivals. I spoke to the Maharaja about it, and he gave orders it should be stopped. Years after, Raji found that the show was again going on, and he was very indignant. I heard that he expressed a wish that Her Highness's orders should be carried out. Raji had no favorites and always sought to do justice. Quiet and dignified, he spoke little and gave few commands, yet all his subjects had the deepest respect for him and tried to avoid his displeasure. Though he was particular about court pageantry and dress, yet his tastes were simple. How thoughtful he was, how loving, how devoted. And yet there was always something sad about him. He seemed more like a prince out of some old legend than a modern young ruler. Once I was rather annoyed with an Englishman and remarked to Raji, "I don't think I can ever forgive him. He is really unpardonable." Raji looked quite sad and said, "Oh, mother, I am sure you don't mean it. You don't think it impossible to forgive anyone." I was never relegated to the position of dowager, but kept up the same state as I had done during his father's lifetime. Raji was influenced by the advice of Lord Carmichael, who had always been our best friend. "He is a godsend," declared Raji, and I certainly can never be grateful enough for the help and sympathy which Lord Carmichael always gave to me and mine. I felt disappointed that Raji was not given a decoration at Durbar. Both he and my brother-in-law, the late Maharaja of Mayurbhanj, were omitted, which I think was surprising, as Raji was the first ruler in Bengal, and my brother-in-law was the first territorial ruler in Orissa. If it had not been for the latter, there would have been no pageant at the show in Calcutta, and it was the pageant which made the show such a success. Their Majesties said it was the best show in Bengal, and Raji deserved recognition if ever any young ruler did. If the government had troubled to look into the management of our state, they would have found no flaw in its administration. How can young rulers be expected to have any heart to work if their efforts do not meet with encouragement? Pretty's wedding lightened a little of our sadness at this time. My second girl was engaged to Lionel Mander, a young Englishman who appeared devoted to her. She was just like an English girl, although at home she lived as an Indian princess. I gave my consent to the marriage, as I had long ago determined to let each of my girls marry the man she loved, and I quite realized that owing to caste and creed, there would be many difficulties in the way of marriage with any of our princes. Raji still seemed very ill, and I felt very anxious about him. He seldom complained, but the change in him was painfully apparent. I sometimes begged him to marry, but his answer was always no, and once he added, "I have no marriage line in my hand." "What nonsense, darling," I said. He smiled. "Where shall I put my wife?" "My rooms are quite wasted, Raji," I answered. He replied, "Mother, your rooms will never be given to another woman while I live. They are always yours. And if I marry, I'll build a new palace. Your rooms shall never be taken away." Raji went down to Calcutta for a Masonic meeting, but developed pediomane poisoning and became dreadfully ill. I begged the doctor in attendance to have a consultation, but was told, "Oh, he'll be all right." I sent for Colonel Brown, but as Raji had his family doctor, an Englishman, with him, Colonel Brown could say little except that Raji had better stay in Calcutta, as he was too weak to travel. The family doctor, however, insisted on Raji going to Cooch Behar. Though ill and weak, he started on the trying journey. I was very worried about him, and following him after a couple of days was told that my darling Raji was anxiously waiting to hear of my arrival. The poor ADC did not know for certain if I had left Calcutta, and kept on sending messages to the stations asking if I were coming. The lives of rulers are in the hands of the doctors appointed by the state. As Raji was getting more and more ill every day, Jit and Victor in despair besought Colonel Brown to see into things, as they declared their brother's life was in danger. It is strange that the doctors did not think it necessary to have a consultation, but Jit insisted on it, saying, "He is my brother and I shall have doctors from Calcutta." Raji rallied and was able to entertain Lord and Lady Carmichael at our shoot in April. They thought Raji seemed in better health and spirits. After our friends had left, Raji asked what were my plans for the summer. "You are going to England," I said. "Let me come with you." That pleased him. I went down to Calcutta a few days before he did. His officers told me that the day he left Cooch Behar the expression on his face was solemn, yet not sad, and that when the national anthem was played at the station, he stood with clasped hands and eyes bent down. Perhaps he heard the call from above in the music. Raji and I, accompanied by his personal staff, arrived in England on the 1st June 1913. It was a cold morning, and Raji looked very pale as he entered the special train at Dover, where we were met by my son-in-law, Mr. Ghoshal. At the station we found my 3 girls and a few friends. All thought Raji was looking very ill, although they did not say so at the time. Raji went to Curzon Hotel with his staff, and I to the Cadogan Hotel, where I stayed with Girlie and baby for a few weeks. I went to see Raji almost every day. I was much distressed to find him on the ground floor and near the telephone, which rang from morning to night. I seldom got news of him. I do not know whom to blame for this, but it made me miserable at the time. I suppose Raji was taken to Derby to brighten him up. It was a cold day and raining. The servants were so careless as to forget to take a great coat or any wraps, and there he caught a chill and high fever set in. My 3rd brother, who was Raji's secretary, was anxious to take him away to 3 Palace Court. He was removed there, and the change made him a little better. It was a nice house, and Raji was very pleased with his rooms. But the noise was too trying, as the traffic was constant. To the disappointment of all, Raji's health did not improve. Dr. Rissian Russell, who had been called in, begged Raji to go to a nursing home. He was wonderfully kind to my boy, and Raji went to a nursing home where he stayed for a fortnight. I spoke to him about taking a country home. "My days are numbered," he answered. "I know my time has come. Do you remember, mother dear, how all the fortune-tellers have said I shall not live to be 32? Raji returned to 3 Palace Court from Ascot. This was the beginning of the end. Something in his face forbade me to hope, but I tried to be brave and not let him know how much I suffered. He often had pain, which the worn-out frame could hardly endure, and the noise of the traffic prevented much rest when the paroxysms had passed. He was getting thinner and thinner, and I felt that the case was getting more serious. Still, I could not give up hope. One day, when he was very ill and could hardly walk, my younger brother helped him to sit down. Raji put his hand on his head and said, "God bless you, you are a good boy." Another evening, when he was very weak and they feared that he was sinking, he called this brother of mine. "Bodhi, sit down by me. I shall soon be starting on the last long journey." He sometimes said, "Why does anyone fear to die? I am not a bit afraid to go." My Raji was quite ready for the long journey to the unknown country, where he was going to meet the father he loved so dearly. Once I asked him, "Raji, don't you wish to live?" He answered, "Mother, I don't wish to die, but if my call has come, if God has sent for me, I shall go. And if I am to go, don't say it is an untimely death. I may be young, but if God sends for me, you must believe, Mother, that it is a timely death." Another day he said, "I have only one wish, but I don't know whether it will be fulfilled. If only I could die in Cooch Behar." All sorts of kind messages were sent by our many friends. "Raji is to live and take care of you," Lady Minto told me. On the 14th August, Raji was removed to Cromer. It was the end of his sad pilgrimage. As he was lifted out of bed, he remarked to his head chauffeur, "Davison, you're taking me away to die." I hid myself in my misery, and as I looked from an upper window, I saw Raji put into the ambulance. I had been asked to go, but I could not, as my eyes were too red and I could not hide my feelings. I followed him to Cromer and stayed at the hotel. I used to go to Raji's house, which was nice and clean and had a pretty little garden. To my eyes, Raji did not look any better, but the doctors thought he was getting on nicely. He had nurses who were good to him, and I shall always be grateful to them. Just before this, Jit had come over from India, as he was going to marry the daughter of the first Hindu Maharaja, the Gayatri of Baroda. They had been fond of each other for some years, but the princess's parents were against the marriage because we were Brahmos and they were Hindus. The princess came with her parents over to Europe, and Jit followed. It was a most romantic story, as the young couple had seen very little of each other. Yet their love was so strong and true that they promised each other they would marry no one else. On the 26th August, Jit and Indira were married. The ceremonies, civil and religious, took place at Buckingham Palace and the registrar's office. I could not help acknowledging the truth of my father's words that the hand of God is always manifest. In this seemingly impossible union, beset throughout with opposition, I again saw the triumph of the new dispensation. For my daughter-in-law gave up riches and caste to follow her husband, for love of him. Indira is very clever and very pretty. She knows several languages and has traveled a great deal. For years I had been wanting her to be my daughter-in-law, and I was as fond of her as of my own daughters. I motored down to Cromer with a friend of mine, Miss Scott, and on our return the doctor who was attending Raji gave me hopeful news. He said Raji was enjoying his food and in 3 weeks' time would be out and about. He assured me that we would return to India at the end of October. He even added, "I don't see why His Highness should not play polo again." On Friday I went to tea with Lady Carmichael's brother, and after dinner I went back again to ask how Raji was. The doctor said he had a little pain, but not much, and he hoped he would be better the next morning. Unfortunately, Dr. Russell had to go to London for a few days. Raji loved him as a friend and had great faith in him. Very early on Saturday morning a note came from the doctor asking me to go over at once. Over my nightgown I tied on a sari and put over all a thick coat, and in my slippers walked from the hotel to the house with Miss Scott, who was an angel to me that day and stayed with me in those hours of anguish. I don't remember how, but I managed to get to the door of the house. In the hall where I met the doctor, I fell. They helped me into the drawing-room and gave me some tea, which I could not drink. The doctor asked me if I could be brave and quiet, as my son wanted to see me. When Raji felt the pain, the only thing he had said was, "Nurse, I am in great pain. I want my mother." I kept back my tears and followed the doctor upstairs to the room where Raji was lying. Never shall I forget my anguish when I looked at him. His lovely eyes were unchanged, but his voice was very faint. "Mother," he whispered as I bent over him, "I am sinking. I know it." I too knew it, and oh, how bitter was the knowledge. "Darling, darling," I said, hardly able to speak. He clasped me in his arms, and his face was close to mine. Rajendra, you know, Mother, even the King of Kings must die." The long morning passed. I was with him the whole time. Once he said, "I'm leaving you behind, Mother." He asked me about Jit and his wife, and also if his youngest uncle were there. Dr. Rizian Russell and my daughter arrived late in the morning. Raji was pleased to see the doctor, and when he saw my youngest brother, he caught hold of his hand tight as if it were the last grip of his friendship. I felt that if Dr. Russell had not been there, I should have had no friend in my great trouble. He was a godsend to me. On Sunday at midnight, surrounded by those who were near and dear to him, Raji breathed his last. 31 years ago, this boy had brought me every possible happiness. Now the world is dark and gloomy, and I do not know how I shall travel the last part of my journey. So heavy laden am I with grief. Raji was not an ordinary son to me. His birth had made every difference in my life. The Cooch Beharis would never have been so friendly towards me had it not been for my Raji's coming. Neither could I have had so happy a home had Raji not arrived. God gave him to me, and God has taken him away. He was the most precious gift I had, but I believe that I shall meet him again in the land of everlasting happiness. These pangs of my heart will cease when I am called to be with my two precious ones. Raji was dressed in his chupkin, and a sacred colored shawl was thrown over him. Wreaths of flowers were sent by kind friends, and his room looked no longer like a morning room, but like a paradise. My Raji had put on the garment of immortality. His painful journey was ended, and in the heaven whither his spirit had flown, he had already been welcomed by his father, and together they await me there. But what remained for me? I had to suffer the long days and the misery of the hours when sleep forsook me, and grief kept a watch by my pillow. I had to live, and think that to live is sometimes the worst torture that can be inflicted on mankind. How often have I proved to myself the truth of those lines? 'Tis hard to smile when one would weep, to speak when one would silent be, to wake when one would wish to sleep, and wake in agony. Now was repeated the sad ceremonial of 2 years ago when my husband's body was committed to the flames. Only 2 years, and the ideal ruler and the child of promise had both vanished from our eyes. Surely we shall never understand the workings of divine providence. All that our sad souls can do is to trust in the infinite wisdom of God. The blank his loss has left in my life will always be there, but he must have gone to do greater work, and the thought of this is the only thing that gives me comfort. Countless were the telegrams and letters of sympathy I received, and the kindness of all my friends touched me very much. The late Duchess of Connaught sent word from Bagshot. We all deeply sympathize with you in your great loss. We look back with pleasure to the time when Raja used to stay with us. We sent the ashes of our beloved back to Cooch Behar, and they rest beside those of his father in the marble mausoleum which has been built in the rose garden. This old garden is a peaceful spot. Long ago the Maharaja learned his lessons in the ruined summer house which still stands on the borders of the lake, where in bygone times the Maharanis used to bathe, and many legends are connected with the place. The scented stillness is now unbroken save for the music of the birds and the mournful whisperings of the trees when the wind speaks to them of the sleepers. This rose garden is walled on all 3 sides, and from it can be seen the snow hills far away. There are masses of roses and lilies, and it is impossible to describe the fragrance of the flowers. Raji and his father are surrounded by peace. Prayers are offered there every evening, and sometimes the boys go there alone in the moonlight. My love is so strong that I think death has opened the door of eternity a little way for me, and my dear ones are nearer to me than ever. Long ago I saw the roses of youth blooming at Belgooria. Later the crimson flowers of love were mine. But the sweetest of all flowers to me are those of remembrance, which shed their petals year after year over the ashes of my dear ones who wait for me on the radiant shore. Take them, O grave, and let them be folded upon thy narrow shelves as garments of the soul laid by, and precious only to ourselves. Take them, O great eternity. Our little life is but a gust that bends the branches of thy tree and trails its blossoms in the dust. End of chapter 13.